At my son's wedding, my own son pretended not to know me when I approached. "It's just a mix-up, don't be so dramatic," my daughter-in-law said. Everyone laughed, but when I revealed the DNA test of my grandson, the guests were stunned. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked into the church in Seattle and couldn't spot my name on the family seating. The usher checked his list, then whispered to the bride. When she came over in her white dress, her smile was tight. "Patricia Moore, mother of the groom," I said. "Oh, Patricia, we had changes. Follow me to your spot." We passed the front rows filled with her family. "Where are we going?" "Just a bit further for the best view." She stopped at the back near the door. "Here's your chair by the exit." I stared. This can't be right. "It's a joke, Patricia. Don't overreact." Then my son appeared in his tux. "Mom, she show you the seat?" His grin broad. "Funny, right?" My heart sank. The boy I raised alone after his father left, working 2 jobs for his college, now acting like I was a stranger. "Come on, Mom, lighten up. It's fun." Guests noticed, some snickering. She said loudly, "She can't handle jokes. That's why he needed space from her drama." I sat through the vows, cheeks hot as laughter echoed, but doubt grew about her pregnancy timeline that never fit. If they could ignore me like this, I'd uncover what family they really built. Sitting in that chair by the exit for the entire ceremony gave me plenty of time to think, and the more I thought, the more certain uncomfortable memories began to surface. It had been exactly 11 months ago when Christopher first brought Ashley home. I remembered the date clearly because it was my birthday, and I'd been hoping for a quiet dinner with my son. Instead, he'd shown up with this stunning young woman who immediately began rearranging the conversation, the seating, even the meal I'd prepared. "Christopher's told me so much about you," she'd said that night, though her smile never quite reached her eyes. "I hope we can be close." Within 6 weeks of that first meeting, they were engaged. Within 3 months, she was pregnant. The timeline had seemed remarkably fast, but Christopher was so happy, so completely smitten, that I'd pushed my concerns aside. Young love, I told myself, sometimes these things happen quickly. But now, watching my son gaze adoringly at his new wife while I sat at the back, those suppressed doubts came flooding back with startling clarity. The baby Daniel had been born exactly 7 months after Christopher and Ashley's first meeting. 7 months? They'd explained it as premature, though Daniel had been a robust 8 pounds, hardly the size of a baby born significantly early. When I gently questioned this, Ashley had become defensive. "Are you suggesting I'm lying about my own pregnancy?" she'd snapped. "Some babies develop faster than others. Maybe if you'd had more children, you'd understand these things better." The comment had stung, cutting right to the heart of my greatest regret. I'd wanted more children after Christopher, but his father had left when Christopher was 3, and I'd never found anyone worth bringing into our small, careful world. Ashley had a talent for finding these tender spots and pressing on them with surgical precision. From my uncomfortable vantage point, I watched the baby being passed around among Ashley's relatives. A beautiful child with dark hair and serious brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. He was 9 months old now, just beginning to pull himself up on furniture and babble in that delightful way babies do. But those eyes, they bothered me. Not because there was anything wrong with them, but because they looked nothing like Christopher's bright blue ones, or Ashley's hazel ones for that matter. In fact, looking around at the wedding guests, I couldn't spot anyone with Daniel's distinctive dark brown eyes and angular features. I shook my head, trying to dispel such thoughts. Genetics could be strange, unpredictable. Babies often looked different from their parents, especially in the early months. I was letting my hurt feelings cloud my judgment. But then I remembered another conversation, one that had happened just 3 months ago when I'd stopped by their apartment unannounced. I'd had to pick up some mail that had been delivered to my address by mistake, and I'd hoped to see Daniel, who seemed to grow and change every week. When I'd knocked, I could hear Ashley on the phone inside, her voice raised in what sounded like an argument. "You need to stay away," she'd been saying. "I've told you 100 times. It's over. I'm married now, and that's final." When she'd opened the door, her face had been flushed, her usual composure rattled. "Patricia, what are you doing here?" "Just dropping off some mail," I'd said, holding up the envelope. "Is everything all right? You seem upset." "Just a telemarketer," she'd said quickly, but her hands were shaking as she took the envelope. You know how persistent they can be. I'd wanted to ask about Daniel to spend a few minutes with my grandson, but Ashley had made it clear I wasn't welcome. "Actually, this isn't a good time," she'd said, already closing the door. "Daniel is napping, and I have some important calls to make." Looking back now, that phone conversation hadn't sounded like a telemarketer at all. It had sounded personal, intimate even, despite the angry tone, like someone who'd had a relationship with Ashley before or during her time with Christopher. Another memory surfaced, this one from just after Daniel was born. I'd been at the hospital holding my supposed grandson for the first time, and a nurse had made an offhand comment. "He's got such distinctive features for a newborn," she'd said. "Usually takes a few months for their real personality to show in their faces, but this little guy knows exactly who he is." At the time, I'd taken it as a compliment. Now I wondered if she'd been trying to tell me something else entirely. The reception was winding down now. The cake had been cut, the bouquet thrown, the first dance completed. Christopher looked happier than I'd ever seen him, spinning Ashley around the dance floor while their guests clapped and cheered. They truly seemed to be in love, at least on his part. But love could make people blind. I'd learned that lesson the hard way with Christopher's father, who'd been charming and attentive right up until the day he cleaned out our bank account and disappeared with his secretary. As I finally stood to leave, my legs stiff from sitting in that awful chair for so long, I made a decision. If Ashley wanted to treat me like an outsider, if she wanted to convince my son that I was nothing more than an unwanted burden, then maybe it was time I started acting like someone with nothing left to lose. I walked over to where Daniel was sleeping peacefully in his carrier, surrounded by gifts and flowers. His tiny features were relaxed in sleep, but even unconscious, those distinctive brown eyes and angular jawline seemed to tell a story that had nothing to do with my blue-eyed, round-faced son. "Beautiful baby," I murmured, loud enough for Ashley to hear from across the room where she was accepting congratulations. "He's going to be quite the heartbreaker when he grows up." Ashley's head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing. For just a moment, I saw fear flash across her face before she recovered her composure. "Interesting." I leaned down and gently touched Daniel's tiny hand. Such a sweet, innocent child caught in whatever web of lies the adults around him had woven. He deserved better than that. More importantly, so did Christopher. As I walked toward the exit, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because my humiliation had been resolved. I was still leaving a wedding where I'd been treated like an outsider, but because I finally had a purpose, a direction for all the anger and hurt that had been building inside me. I was going to find out the truth about Daniel. Not for revenge, though. I couldn't deny that the thought of wiping that smug smile off Ashley's face held considerable appeal. I was going to do it because my son deserved to know who he'd really married and what kind of family he was trying to build. If I was right about my suspicions, this beautiful wedding would turn out to be built on a foundation of lies. And if I was wrong, well, at least I'd know for certain, and maybe I could find a way to make peace with the family that no longer seemed to want me. Either way, it was time to stop being the woman who sat quietly by the exit and start being the mother who protected her child even when he didn't want to be protected. 3 days after the wedding, I sat in my small kitchen staring at the yellow pages, my hands trembling slightly as I flipped through the section marked Private Investigators. The idea felt so foreign, so dramatic, that I almost closed the book several times. But every time I hesitated, I remembered that chair by the exit and the way my own son had pretended not to know me. The first investigator I called sounded like he specialized in cheating spouses and insurance fraud.
The second hung up when I mentioned wanting to investigate my daughter-in-law. It wasn't until I reached Stephanie Wong, a former police detective who now ran her own small practice, that I found someone who understood.
Family situations are delicate, she said during our phone consultation. But if there are questions about paternity, especially when children are involved, those answers deserve to be found. Can you meet me tomorrow? Stephanie's office was in a modest strip mall between a dry cleaner and a tax preparation service. She was a small, efficient woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She listened without judgment as I explained my suspicions, taking notes in a careful, precise handwriting. The timeline is certainly questionable, she agreed, after I'd laid out everything I could remember. 7 months from meeting to birth, claiming prematurity, but with a full-term wait, and you said the baby doesn't resemble either supposed parent. Not at all, but I know genetics can be unpredictable. I could be completely wrong about this. Stephanie smiled gently. That's what DNA testing is for. But I want you to understand what we're talking about here. If your suspicions are correct, proving it will destroy your son's marriage and possibly his relationship with you permanently. Are you prepared for that possibility? I thought about Christopher's face at the wedding, the way he'd looked at me with such casual dismissal. Our relationship is already destroyed. At least this way, if I'm right, he'll know the truth. And if you're wrong? Then I'll know I'm wrong and maybe I can find a way to make peace with reality. Stephanie nodded. Fair enough. For a basic DNA test, I'll need samples from the child and from your son for comparison. The child's sample is usually easier to obtain. A pacifier, a bottle, anything he's put in his mouth recently. Your son's sample could be more challenging. My heart sank. I barely see Daniel anymore. Ashley makes sure of that, and Christopher. I trailed off, realizing how completely I'd been cut out of their lives. Let me do some preliminary investigation first, Stephanie suggested. Look into Ashley's background. See what I can find about her life before she met your son. Sometimes the truth reveals itself in unexpected ways. Over the next week, I found myself living in a strange state of suspended animation. I went through my daily routines, work at the library where I'd been employed for 12 years, grocery shopping, evening walks around my neighborhood. But my mind was constantly elsewhere, wondering what Stephanie might be discovering. I replayed conversations with Ashley in my head, analyzing every word, every expression for clues. I remembered the first time I'd met her, how she'd complimented my home while subtly suggesting updates. At the time, I'd thought it was just her style. Now it seemed like the beginning of her takeover. I thought about Christopher, how he'd changed since meeting her. He used to call every week, visit often. Now, months could pass without a word, unless Ashley was involved. Was it all her influence, or had I missed something in my own son? The call came on a Thursday evening as I was heating up leftover soup for dinner. Patricia, it's Stephanie. I found some interesting information about Ashley's background. Can you come in tomorrow afternoon? I barely slept that night, my imagination running wild with possibilities. When I arrived at Stephanie's office the next day, she had a manila folder thick with papers spread across her desk. Ashley wasn't entirely truthful about her past, Stephanie began without preamble. She told your son she'd lived in Denver before moving here, working as a marketing coordinator for a small firm that went out of business. That part is true, but incomplete. She slid a photograph across the desk. It showed Ashley at what appeared to be a casual outdoor gathering, smiling and laughing with a group of people. In the photo, her arm was wrapped around a tall, dark-haired man with serious brown eyes and angular features that made my stomach lurch with recognition. His name is Justin Reed Stephanie, continued. They dated for nearly 2 years in Denver. According to several mutual friends I spoke with, the relationship was serious. They lived together for the last 8 months before she suddenly left town. I picked up the photograph with shaking hands. The resemblance between Justin and little Daniel was unmistakable. The same dark eyes, the same distinctive jawline, even the same slightly crooked smile. When did she leave Denver? I asked, though I was already afraid of the answer.
Approximately 6 weeks before she met your son. According to her former landlord, she broke her lease unexpectedly and left without forwarding address, claimed she had a job opportunity she couldn't pass up. The timeline was devastating. If Ashley had been living with Justin until 6 weeks before meeting Christopher, and if Daniel was born 7 months later, there's more, said gently. I spoke with Justin. He's been trying to locate Ashley for almost 2 years. He believes she was pregnant when she left Denver.
My soup from the night before threatened to come back up. He knows about Daniel. Not specifically, but he knows she was pregnant with his child when she disappeared. He's been searching for her ever since. I stared at the photograph, this stranger who might be my grandson's real father. He looked like a decent man, someone who'd been searching for his child for 2 years, while that child was being raised by my son as his own.
What kind of person does this? I whispered.
Stephanie's expression was compassionate but firm. Someone who's very good at reinventing herself when circumstances become inconvenient. This Justin fellow has a good job, a stable life, but apparently Ashley decided she could do better. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Ashley had left Denver pregnant with Justin's child, found my successful, trusting son, and convinced him the baby was his. She'd found herself a better situation and had been willing to lie to everyone, including an innocent baby, to secure it.
I need to get that DNA sample, I said, my voice stronger than I'd heard it in weeks.
Are you sure? Once we have proof, there's no going back. I thought about Daniel, innocent and trusting, believing Christopher was his father. I thought about Christopher pouring his love into a child who wasn't his, while some stranger in Denver grieved for a son he'd never met. And I thought about myself sitting by the exit while Ashley laughed at the family she was destroying with her lies.
I'm sure.
Stephanie nodded. Then we need to be very careful about how we proceed. If Ashley suspects what we're doing, she could disappear again, taking Daniel with her. She's done it before. That afternoon, I drove past Christopher and Ashley's apartment complex, trying to work up the courage to knock on their door. I had brought a small gift for Daniel, a stuffed bear I'd picked up at the drugstore, hoping it might give me a few minutes alone with him. But as I sat in my car watching their building, I realized I was terrified. Not of Ashley's hostility, which I had grown accustomed to, but of what I might discover. What if the DNA test confirmed my suspicions? What if it didn't? Either way, after today, nothing would ever be the same. I was still sitting there paralyzed by indecision when Ashley emerged from the building pushing Daniel in his stroller. She was dressed casually in yoga pants and a tank top, her brown hair pulled back in a messy bun, looking like any other young mother out for an afternoon walk. But I knew better now. I knew about Justin Reed in Denver and the elaborate lies she'd constructed around my family. As I watched her stop to chat with a neighbor, laughing and gesturing animatedly, while Daniel babbled happily in his stroller, I felt a cold anger settle into my bones. She was good at this, I realized. Good at pretending, good at making people believe whatever version of reality served her purposes. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the woman she'd tried to throw away like an outsider. I started my car and drove home, my mind already working on a plan. Stephanie was right. We needed to be careful. But careful didn't mean passive. It was time to stop being the victim in Ashley's story and start being the author of my own. The opportunity came sooner than I'd expected. On Sunday afternoon, Christopher called with an invitation that surprised me so much I almost didn't trust it. "Mom, would you like to come over for dinner tonight? Ashley thought it might be nice to have a family meal together." I gripped the phone tighter, immediately suspicious. After the wedding humiliation, the idea of Ashley suddenly wanting my company seemed impossible. Are you sure that's what she wants? Of course, we've been talking, and we both feel bad about how things went at the wedding. The whole pretending thing. It was supposed to be funny, but maybe it went too far. Maybe it went too far. Not it was cruel and humiliating, just maybe too far. But I swallowed my pride. This might be my only chance to get the DNA sample Stephanie needed. That's very thoughtful. What time should I come over?
6. And Mom, could you maybe bring some of those dinner rolls you used to make, the ones with the herbs?
It was such a normal request, so reminiscent of the son I'd raised, that for a moment I almost forgot about DNA tests and Justin Reed and all the complicated deceptions that had brought us to this point. Of course, honey, I'll make them fresh this afternoon. I spent the next few hours in my kitchen kneading dough and trying to calm my nerves. The dinner rolls were Christopher's favorite, something I'd made for every special occasion throughout his childhood. They required patience, multiple rises, careful timing, but they'd always been my way of showing love when words felt inadequate. As I shaped the dough into perfect rounds, I thought about what Stephanie had told me to look for. Any item the baby has put in his mouth recently, a pacifier, a toy, even a spoon if he's eating solid foods. Just slip it into a plastic bag when no one's looking. It sounded so simple, so clinical, but the reality of deceiving my own family, even a family that had deceived me first, made my stomach churn with guilt. At exactly 6, I stood outside Christopher's apartment door, holding a basket of warm rolls and trying to project an image of the grateful mother-in-law, happy to be included. When Ashley opened the door, her smile seemed genuine enough, though I noticed it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Patricia, come in. Something smells amazing." The apartment was immaculate, as always, decorated in shades of white and gray that looked expensive but felt cold. Daniel was in his high chair in the kitchen, banging a blue plastic spoon against the tray, while Ashley finished preparing what appeared to be an elaborate meal. "Can I help with anything?" I asked, setting my basket on the counter. "Just keep Daniel entertained while I get everything ready. He's been fussy all afternoon." I approached my supposed grandson carefully, still amazed by how little he resembled either Christopher or Ashley. Up close, the resemblance to Justin Reed was even more pronounced. Daniel looked up at me with those serious brown eyes and gave me a drooly smile that made my heart ache. "Hi there, sweetie," I said softly, reaching out to touch his tiny hand. He grabbed my finger immediately, his grip surprisingly strong for a 9-month-old. "He likes you, Christopher," said appearing in the kitchen doorway. "Look at that smile." For a moment, watching my son beam at what he believed was his child's affection for his mother, I almost lost my nerve. How could I destroy this beautiful illusion? Even if it was built on lies, Christopher was genuinely happy. Daniel was loved and cared for. Was the truth worth shattering all of that? But then I remembered Justin Reed somewhere in Denver, not knowing if his child was alive or dead. I thought about Christopher building his life around a lie that could explode at any moment. And I thought about myself, treated like an outsider because I was the only threat to Ashley's carefully constructed fiction. The truth mattered. It always mattered. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant. Ashley seemed to be making a genuine effort to include me in the conversation, asking about my work at the library and even complimenting my dinner rolls. Christopher was relaxed and happy, telling stories about their honeymoon and making plans for Daniel's first birthday party. "We're thinking of having it at the park," Ashley said, spooning pureed carrots into Daniel's mouth. "A picnic theme, maybe family-friendly."
"That sounds lovely," I replied, watching as Daniel grabbed the spoon and immediately put it in his mouth, covering it with carrots and saliva. Perfect.
"Can I help feed him?" I asked. "It's been so long since I've had baby time." Ashley hesitated for just a moment, then handed me the spoon. "Sure, he's actually getting pretty good at eating. Sometimes he wants to do it himself." For the next 10 minutes, I fed Daniel while chatting with Christopher about work and weekend plans. The baby was delightfully messy, getting food everywhere, including all over the spoon. When he finally lost interest and started pushing the food away, I stood up to rinse the spoon in the sink. "Let me get that," Ashley said, reaching for it. "It's fine, I've got it," I replied, already turning toward the sink.
In one smooth motion, I rinsed the spoon and slipped it into the plastic bag I'd hidden in my purse, substituting a clean spoon from the dish drainer. The whole exchange took less than 30 seconds. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced normality. We looked at photos from the honeymoon, discussed plans for the holidays, and I held Daniel while he dozed against my shoulder. Throughout it all, I felt the weight of that plastic bag in my purse containing what might be the key to destroying everything. When I finally left, Ashley walked me to the door while Christopher cleaned up the kitchen. "Thank you for coming tonight," she said. And for a moment, her voice sounded almost sincere. "I know things have been difficult between us, but we're family now, and I want Daniel to have a relationship with his grandmother." His grandmother. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I managed to keep my expression neutral. I want that too. She studied my face for a long moment, and I worried that somehow she could see through me, could sense the deception I was carrying. But then she smiled again and gave me an awkward hug. "Drive safely, and thank you again for the rolls. Christopher's been talking about them for weeks." The next morning, I met Stephanie at a laboratory across town. The technician, Heather, explained the process while I tried not to think about what I was doing. "We'll compare the DNA from this sample with a sample from the alleged father," she said, carefully labeling the bag containing Daniel's spoon. "Results usually take 3 to 5 business days." "And what exactly will those results tell us?" I asked. "If there's a biological relationship, we'll know with 99.9% accuracy. If there isn't, we'll know that too." 3 to 5 business days. It seemed like both an eternity and no time at all. Stephanie must have seen the uncertainty on my face. "Are you having second thoughts?" I thought about Daniel's smile, about Christopher's happiness, about the way Ashley had hugged me goodbye. Then I thought about Justin Reed, still searching for his child after 2 years. "No," I said firmly. "I need to know." The waiting was excruciating. Every day felt like a week. Every phone call made my heart race, thinking it might be the results. I went through the motions of my normal routine, but my mind was constantly elsewhere, imagining different scenarios, different outcomes. I found myself replaying the dinner in my head, analyzing every word, every glance for signs that Ashley suspected something. Had she noticed the spoon swap? Was her hug a way to check my purse? Paranoia crept in, but I pushed it back, focusing on work at the library, shelving books, helping patrons, anything to distract. One evening, I even drove to Discovery Park, the place Ashley mentioned for Daniel's birthday, sitting on a bench overlooking the water, thinking about how different life could have been if Ashley had been honest from the start. Would Christopher still have married her? Would I have a real grandson? The questions swirled, but no answers came. Finally, on Friday afternoon, Stephanie called. "Patricia, the results are in. Can you come to my office?" My hands were shaking so badly I could barely drive. When I walked into Stephanie's office, she was sitting behind her desk with a manila envelope in front of her, her expression grave. "Before I show you these," she said, "I want you to know that whatever these results say, you've done the right thing by seeking the truth." I nodded, not trusting my voice. She opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "The DNA test shows no biological relationship between the baby and your son. Daniel is not Christopher's child." Even though I'd expected it, even though I'd been virtually certain, hearing the words spoken aloud felt like being hit by a truck. I sank into the chair across from Stephanie's desk, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. "Are you absolutely certain?" 99.9% certain. The lab ran the test twice to be sure. Stephanie's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm sorry, Patricia. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but that was the strange thing. Part of me was relieved. Not happy, certainly not vindicated, but relieved to finally know the truth. For months, I'd felt like I was going crazy, seeing things that didn't make sense, being told my perceptions were wrong." "What happens now?" I asked. "That's up to you.
You could confront Ashley privately, give her a chance to come clean to your son himself. You could tell Christopher directly, or, she paused, studying my face. Given how they've treated you, you could choose to reveal this information publicly at a time and place of your choosing. I thought about that chair by the exit, the way Christopher had pretended not to know me, the laughter of the guests who found my humiliation entertaining. I thought about Justin Reed, who had the right to know his child. And I thought about Christopher living a lie that was bound to explode eventually. I need some time to think about this, I said. But even as I said it, I was already beginning to form a plan. Ashley had chosen the time and place for my humiliation. Perhaps it was time I returned the favor. The truth had been revealed. Now I had to decide what to do with it. For 2 weeks after receiving the DNA results, I carried the truth like a stone in my chest. Every interaction with Christopher felt like a performance. Every smile forced, every casual question about Daniel laden with secret knowledge that threatened to spill out at any moment. I avoided calling too often, afraid I'd slip. When Christopher texted about Daniel's latest milestone, I replied with emojis hiding the turmoil inside. Nights were worst, lying awake debating options. Private confrontation? Ashley might twist it, deny everything. Tell Christopher alone? He might not believe without proof in hand. Public reveal seemed fairest, with witnesses no room for manipulation. But timing key. I waited for the right moment, practicing words in the mirror, imagining reactions. The opportunity came in the form of another invitation, this one even more surprising than the dinner. Ashley called me herself on a Thursday evening, her voice bright and cheerful. "Patricia, I have a wonderful idea. What would you think about hosting a little celebration for Daniel's first steps? He's so close to walking on his own, and I thought it would be nice to have both families together when it happens." My grip tightened on the phone. Both families. Well, my parents are driving down from out of town this weekend. I thought it would be perfect timing for everyone to meet everyone, a real family gathering. The irony was almost too much to bear. Ashley wanted to parade her perfect little family in front of her relatives, with me playing the role of the grateful grandmother. She had no idea she was about to hand me the perfect stage for the performance of my lifetime. "That sounds lovely," I managed. "What can I bring?" "Just yourself. Oh, and maybe some of those dinner rolls again. My parents absolutely loved them when I told them about dinner the other night." I agreed, hanging up with shaking hands. This was it, the chance to reveal everything with witnesses. But doubt crept in. Was I ready for the fallout? The loss of Christopher? The pain for Daniel? I called Stephanie for advice. "You're doing this for the right reasons," she said. "Truth sets free, even if painful." I spent the next days preparing, reviewing the report, practicing my speech. The envelope with results, photo, contact info became my constant companion. Saturday afternoon arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I drove to the apartment complex. In my purse, the manila envelope felt heavy. Heart pounding, I knocked. The apartment was already crowded when I arrived. Ashley's parents, Robert and Michelle Thompson, were an elegant couple in their 60s who clearly had money and weren't shy about showing it. Michelle wore a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and Robert's watch caught the light every time he gestured. "You must be Patricia Michelle," said, approaching me with a smile that was polite but measuring. "We've heard so much about you." I wondered exactly what they'd heard, given that Ashley had arranged for Christopher to pretend not to know me at the wedding. "It's wonderful to meet you all. Thank you for including me in this celebration." "Of course," said Robert, though his handshake was brief and formal. "Family is family." If only he knew how ironic that statement was about to become. For the first hour, I played my part perfectly. I admired Michelle's stories about their recent cruise, laughed at Robert's jokes about retirement. The whole time I kept one eye on Daniel, who was indeed very close to taking his first independent steps. He was pulling himself up on furniture and taking tentative steps while holding on, his face bright with determination. Christopher was in his element, the proud father documenting every moment with his phone, calling out encouragement to the baby who believed he was his son. The sight of it made my heart ache, but I pushed the emotion aside. This had to be done. "Should we move to the living room?" Ashley suggested as we finished lunch. More space for Daniel to practice walking. We all gathered in the spacious living room, sitting in a loose circle on the floor, while Daniel stood unsteadily in the center, holding on to the coffee table. The atmosphere was warm and expectant, everyone waiting for that magical moment when he would let go and take his first solo steps. "Come on, buddy," Christopher called, sitting about 6 feet away with his arms outstretched. "Come to Daddy." The word daddy hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to remain calm. Daniel looked around at all the encouraging faces, seeming to sense that something important was happening. He let go of the coffee table and stood swaying for a moment, then took one careful step, then another. "He's doing it!" Michelle squealed. Everyone was cheering and clapping as Daniel took 5 wobbly steps before sitting down hard on his bottom, looking surprised but pleased with himself. Christopher scooped him up, spinning him around while the baby giggled. "Daniel's first steps," Ashley said, tears in her eyes. "I wish we could capture this moment forever." "Actually," I said, standing up slowly, "I think this is the perfect time to share something I've been wanting to discuss with the whole family." The room fell quiet, all eyes turning to me. Ashley's smile faltered slightly, perhaps sensing something in my tone. "What is it, Mom?" Christopher asked, still holding Daniel. I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila envelope, my hands steadier than I'd expected them to be. "I've recently learned some information that I think everyone needs to know, especially you, Christopher." Ashley's face went pale. "Patricia, what are you doing?" "I'm telling the truth," I said simply. "Something I probably should have done weeks ago." I opened the envelope and pulled out the DNA test results, holding them up so everyone could see the official laboratory letterhead. 2 weeks ago, I had a DNA test performed on Daniel. The silence in the room was deafening. Christopher's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something that might have been understanding. "Mom, why would you?" he started. "Because I suspected what these results have now confirmed," I interrupted. "Daniel is not your biological son." The explosion of voices was immediate. Michelle gasped audibly. Robert muttered something under his breath. But it was Ashley's reaction that I focused on. The way her face crumpled, then hardened, then crumpled again as she realized her carefully constructed world was falling apart. "That's impossible," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "How dare you?" "The test shows 0 biological relationship between Christopher and Daniel," I continued, my voice cutting through the chaos, which led me to do some additional investigation. I pulled out the photograph of Justin Reed and handed it to Christopher. His face went white as he stared at the image, then looked at Daniel, then back at the photograph. "Who is this?" he whispered. "His name is Justin Reed. He's a software engineer from Denver who's been searching for Ashley and his son for the past 2 years. Ashley finally found her voice, and when she spoke, it was with the fury of someone who'd been cornered. "You had no right. How dare you spy on my family, interfere in my marriage?" "Your marriage?" I laughed, and there was no humor in it. "Your marriage that's based on a lie? Your family that you built by deceiving my son about the paternity of a child that isn't his?" "Stop it," Christopher said quietly, still staring at the photograph. "Just everybody stop." The room fell silent again. Daniel, sensing the tension, had started to fuss in Christopher's arms. My son looked at the baby, really looked at him, and I saw the moment when everything clicked into place. The brown eyes, the angular features, the complete lack of resemblance to anyone in our family. "How long have you known?" he asked Ashley, his voice barely audible. Ashley opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Christopher, I can explain." "How long?" She crumpled all her defiance, disappearing at once. "Since before I met you," she whispered. "I was pregnant when I left Denver. Justin, he wanted to get married, but I couldn't see myself stuck in that life forever. When I met you, you were so successful, so kind, and when you fell in love with me, you believed the baby was yours." Christopher's voice was hollow, emotionless. "You were so happy about it," Ashley said desperately. "You talked about how you'd always wanted to be a father, how Daniel was the best thing that had ever happened to you. I couldn't take that away from you." "So you lied to me. For over a year, you let me believe." He stopped looking down at Daniel, who was reaching for his face with tiny hands. "Does he know Justin? Does he know he has a son?" "He suspected," I said when Ashley didn't answer. "My investigator spoke with him. He's been looking for you both." The room erupted again, but this time it was Ashley's family in chaos. Michelle was demanding explanations. Robert was asking pointed questions about legal implications. Through it all, Christopher sat quietly holding Daniel and processing the destruction of everything he'd believed about his life. Finally, he looked up at me. "You could have told me privately," he said. "Why did you do it like this?" I thought about that chair by the exit, about the way he pretended not to know me, about all the times Ashley had made me feel small and unwanted. But when I answered, I kept my voice calm and truthful, because she's done this before, Christopher. She's very good at manipulating situations to her advantage, at making people believe whatever serves her purposes. I wanted witnesses. I wanted there to be no doubt about what was said and what was proven. He nodded slowly, then stood up and handed Daniel to me. "I need some air."
As Christopher walked out onto the balcony, Ashley turned to face me, her beautiful face twisted with rage and desperation. "You've destroyed everything," she hissed. "Are you happy now? You've ruined my marriage, my family." "No," I said firmly, settling Daniel against my shoulder as he began to cry. "You destroyed it the moment you decided to build it on lies. I just revealed the truth." Looking around the room at the shocked faces of Ashley's family at the chaos and confusion my revelation had created, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph or satisfaction, but a deep, profound sadness for all the pain that could have been avoided if one person had simply chosen honesty over convenience. But along with the sadness came something else, a sense of lightness I hadn't felt in months. The truth was out now. Whatever happened next, we could at least build it on a foundation of reality instead of lies. 3 months later, I stood in my Tacoma kitchen making dinner rolls, not because anyone had asked for them, but because the familiar ritual of kneading dough had become my meditation, my way of processing everything that had changed since that Saturday afternoon when the truth finally came to light. The immediate aftermath had been as chaotic as I'd expected. Ashley's parents had left that very evening, Michelle barely speaking to her daughter as they packed their bags. They seemed shaken by the magnitude of Ashley's deception. Christopher had filed for annulment within a week, citing fraud. The legal process was surprisingly straightforward when you had DNA evidence and documentation of deliberate deception about paternity. Ashley had initially fought it, but her lawyer had apparently explained the futility of her position. The hardest part, as I'd known it, would be watching Christopher say goodbye to Daniel. Despite everything, despite knowing the truth, he'd spent over a year believing he was that child's father. Love doesn't disappear just because biology proves it was misplaced. "I keep thinking I should hate him," Christopher had told me during one of our weekly coffees, a new tradition we'd established in the wake of the chaos. "He's the living proof of how completely I was fooled. But when I look at him, I see an innocent baby who didn't choose any of this." "Exactly. I finished for him." Justin Reed had arrived from Denver within 2 weeks of my revelation. I'd expected to dislike him, this stranger who'd complicated our lives by simply existing. But he'd turned out to be exactly what Stephanie's investigation had suggested, a decent man who'd been searching for his child and the woman he'd loved. The meeting between Justin and Christopher had been awkward but respectful. Two men who'd been unwitting victims of the same deception, trying to figure out how to navigate an impossible situation with dignity. "I need you to know," Justin had said during that first meeting, "I never knew she was pregnant when she left. If I had known, I would have moved heaven and earth to find her." Christopher had nodded stiffly. "What are your plans now?" "I want to be part of my son's life. I want to support him financially, emotionally, however I can. But I also understand that you've been his father for the past year. I don't want to just tear him away from everything he knows." It was more consideration than Ashley had ever shown anyone. The custody arrangement they'd eventually worked out was complicated, but fair. Justin would take primary custody, moving to Seattle to be closer to Christopher and to make the transition easier. Christopher would have regular visitation rights until Daniel was old enough to understand the situation, at which point they'd revisit the arrangement. Ashley had fought the custody decision bitterly, but her position was weak. She'd committed fraud, she had no stable income of her own, and she demonstrated a pattern of deception that judges tend to take seriously in custody cases. The last I'd heard, she'd moved back with her parents pending the outcome of various legal proceedings. Robert and Michelle had apparently been less forgiving of their daughter's behavior than I might have expected from people who'd initially seemed so protective of her. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, Christopher was coming for dinner, and for the first time in over a year, it was just going to be the two of us. No Ashley monitoring our conversation, no tension about whether I was welcome in my own son's life, no walking on eggshells around topics that might upset the delicate balance of lies. The doorbell rang at 6. Some things never changed. Christopher had always been punctual. "Something smells amazing," he said as I opened the door. "They're almost ready," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "How was your week?" It was such a normal question, the kind of thing I'd longed to ask him for months without feeling like I was intruding on his carefully constructed life. "Actually, pretty good," he said, settling into his old spot at my kitchen table. "I had lunch with Justin and Daniel yesterday." I paused in pulling the rolls from the oven. This was still an adjustment for all of us, the idea that Christopher would voluntarily spend time with the man who'd unknowingly been his replacement. "How's Daniel doing?" "Good, really good, actually. Justin's great with him, and he's patient with me, too. He lets me be part of things, even though he doesn't have to." I set the basket of rolls on the table and sat down across from my son. "That must be complicated for you." Christopher was quiet for a moment, buttering a roll with the same careful precision he'd used as a child. "It is. Some days I still wake up and think about what Daniel might be doing, whether he needs anything. Then I remember that he's not, that I'm," he trailed off. "You're not his father," I said gently, "but you were. For a year, you were everything a father should be. That love wasn't wasted, honey. It just got redirected, honey." "Is that what happened to you?" he asked, looking up at me with eyes that reminded me so much of his father's. "When Dad left, did your love for him just get redirected?" The question caught me off guard. We'd never really talked about his father's abandonment. Not honestly. In a way, yes. All that love I would have given him, I poured into raising you instead. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, "for how I treated you. For pretending not to know you at the wedding. For pushing you away. For choosing her version of reality over yours." I felt tears prick at my eyes. "You fell in love, Christopher. People do foolish things when they're in love. Trust me, I know something about that. But you're my mother. I should have protected you, not participated in humiliating you." "You were protecting what you thought was your family. I understand that impulse." He reached across the table and took my hand.
You saved me, you know. If you hadn't discovered the truth, how long would it have gone on? Would I have spent years raising another man's child thinking he was mine? Would Ashley have ever told me the truth?
I squeezed his hand. I don't know, but I do know that Daniel deserves to know his real father, and Justin deserves to know his son, and you deserve to build your life on truth, not lies, even if the truth hurt, especially then. We ate dinner in comfortable silence, the kind of easy quiet that I'd forgotten we could share. Afterward, Christopher helped me clear the table and wash dishes, falling back into old rhythms as if the past year of distance had never happened. "I've been thinking about dating again," he said as we finished cleaning up. "Not seriously, not yet, but eventually."
That's healthy, I said, hanging up the dish towel. You're young. You have so much to offer someone this time. I want to do things differently. Take it slower. Ask more questions. Maybe introduce them to my very smart mother who has good instincts about people. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. Your very smart mother who's also learned a thing or two about speaking up when something doesn't feel right. Good, Christopher, said, hugging me tight. I need someone who will tell me the truth, even when it's difficult to hear. After he left, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea thinking about the strange journey that had brought us here. 6 months ago, I'd been the unwanted mother at the wedding where my son pretended not to know me. Tonight, I was simply Christopher's mother again, trusted with his thoughts and feelings, valued for my perspective instead of dismissed for my inconvenience. The truth had been devastating in the short term. A marriage ended, families torn apart, an innocent baby caught in the middle of adult deceptions. But it had also been liberating. No more walking on eggshells, no more pretending that cruelty was humor, no more accepting treatment that diminished my worth as a human being. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was a photo from Justin. Daniel taking confident steps across a playground while other children played nearby. The message that accompanied it was simple. Thought you'd like to see how steady he's getting on his feet. I smiled, studying the picture of the little boy who would never be my biological grandson, but who would always hold a special place in my heart. In the photo, Daniel was laughing, his arms outstretched for balance, his face bright with the joy of newfound independence. He was learning to walk on his own, away from the lies and manipulations that had defined his early life. In a way, so was I. I texted back, "He looks happy and healthy. Thank you for including me." Justin's response came quickly. "You're the one who made it possible for him to know his real family. We'll always be grateful for that." Real family, not the family built on convenience and deception, but the messy, complicated, honest family that emerges when people choose truth over comfort. I set my phone aside and picked up the book I'd been reading, settling deeper into my favorite chair. Tomorrow I would go to work at the library, maybe call my friend to catch up, perhaps visit the farmer's market I'd been meaning to explore. Simple pleasures, but they were mine to choose, now without having to worry about whether they would meet with someone else's approval. The truth had set us all free, even when, especially when, it had hurt. And for the first time in over a year, I was exactly where I belonged in my own life, valued by people who saw my worth, surrounded by love that didn't require me to diminish myself to receive it. Some victories don't come with fanfare or celebration. Sometimes the greatest triumph is simply the quiet satisfaction of knowing you chose courage over comfort, truth over convenience, and your own dignity over someone else's lies. That night, I slept better than I had in months. But the peace didn't last. As weeks turned to months, Christopher's contact faded. Calls went unanswered, visits canceled. He chose to reconcile with Ashley, believing her promises of change. One final conversation sealed it. "Mom, it's too much drama. We need to cut ties for Daniel's sake." The cut was complete, no turning back. I lost my son to the lie he embraced. From this, I learned that truth can free you, but it can also leave you alone. Lies bind people in illusion, but revealing them can sever bonds irrevocably.
I chose honesty and paid the price, but I'd do it again to live without deception.
Be vigilant in relationships. Spot the red flags of manipulation early to avoid the heartbreak of built on lies families. Thanks for listening to my story. Subscribe for more and comment what you'd do in my place along with your city.